All right, welcome everyone to our last QtDay talk. This one is called QML Prototyping, Creating Production-Ready and Reusable Code by Alexandra Betouni. So let's bring her on live just now so that we can say hi before the video starts. There we go. Hello, Alexandra. Good to have you here for QtDay. How are you?
Nice to be here as well, even though it's virtual, it's a bit weird.
Yes, we would all prefer it to be live. But,
absolutely. But it's good that it still happens. That's really important. So
absolutely. We're happy to have you here. All right, so everyone, let me tell you a little bit about Alexandra. She is the Managing and Technical Director at Extendly, a company that helps clients to design, develop, or improve their existing UI, product, or prototype in an agile way, starting from the middleware up to the interface. Previously, she was a BlackBerry 10 OS Cascades app developer, a UX developer at Pelagia Core, currently Luxoff, a UX design technologist at VW, and a freelance software consultant at QtQML Services. She has several years of experience on building award-winning Qt and QML medical device prototypes and mobile apps, but as well as large-scale production automotive products. And during her career path, she has helped major automotive companies to build high-quality products and prototypes, living and working in countries like Germany, Spain, and Ireland. In her spare time, she's a bass guitar player, enjoys everything about music, exercising, socializing, building small embedded prototypes, joining conferences, training, and meetups as an attendee as well as a speaker. So we're glad to have you here for the speaker this time around.
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And a little bit about this talk, from prototype to production and code reusability. These are the top benefits of the Qt framework, but usually not happening in real life. So we'll examine best QML practices so that we end up building a solid base UI code, getting more than one app for the price of one. All right, so was there anything else you wanted to add to that before we watch the video?
You have me covered completely.
Fantastic. All right. Great. Well, then, everyone, please stay tuned for the end. We'll have a live Q&A with her, and I'll just give you all a gentle reminder that if you do have questions to ask, next to the room chat, you'll see the question mark icon. That's the Q&A chat, not the help button. So please ask your questions there just to keep things organized. We'll have a break halfway through for 5 minutes, so you can get some water until then. All right. Well, everyone, enjoy the video, and we'll see you afterwards.
So hi, welcome to my talk today at QtDay Italy 2020. It's my second time at this conference and it's really my pleasure to be here again. Thank you guys for accepting me once again at your beautiful conference. It's really nice to be here and however, this year it's virtual, so it's a bit weird. It's my first time that I do a virtual conference. But that doesn't mean necessarily that it doesn't have its benefits. So, for example, I can do things like that. So you see, I'm in Florence or things like that. Anyway, so let's get started. My name is Alexandra Betouni. I'm Managing Director at Extendly Project Ltd. And also I'm an author of Udemy, of the online course at Udemy and Skillshare regarding prototyping in QML. And I have also a second course which is coming on the way currently. Besides that, and before that, I was working as an employee at Volkswagen and as well as Pelagia Core AG. And during all these years, I have participated in small-scale projects, but as well as big-scale projects like the MBUX from Mercedes-Benz, as well as the NEPTUNE UI, which is the reference UI of the Qt Automotive Suite. So today I will be talking to you about the best practices or hints, take it as you want, which I learned through my experience so many years that you could apply since the beginning of your concept development. So let it be a prototype or directly the product in order to be able to reuse that code and reuse its components or its parts on other projects or products or versions as well. So once again, thanks for attending my talk. Let's go and see what these best practices are. First of all, let's start by finding out what is a prototype. So from the Wikipedia, a prototype is an early sample, model, or release of a product built to test a concept or a process. It is a term used in a variety of contexts using semantics, design, electronics, and software programming. A prototype is generally used to evaluate a new design to enhance precision by system analysts and users. Prototyping serves to provide specification for a real working system rather than a theoretical one. In some design workflow models, creating a prototype, a process sometimes called materialization, is the step between the formalization and the evaluation of an idea. And from the Cambridge online dictionary, it says that it's the first example of something such as a machine or other industrial product from which all later forms are developed. So immediately from these two definitions, we understand that when starting to create a prototype, we need to have in mind that we need to recycle. Talking about recycling, what it could be recycled, for example, it could be the concept, it could be the design. So why not? We created a design for this specific idea or prototype or concept, so why not use it in other projects as well? Same as the design, it could be the components. So we have created a bunch of buttons, for example, why not reuse them in other projects? Same goes for the POC code. So usually we tend to create a proof of concept to just test our ideas and see how they are really working or they look like. And of course, we can reuse the architecture. That means that if we build our prototype with a good architecture since the beginning, then we can reuse it as many times as we like. Just to make it a picture a bit in your minds, let's talk about the story. Let's assume that our company wants to implement a smart table where the users can interact with it and can, for example, read the news or have video conferences, etc. So that's the concept. Once we have the concept, then we should follow the development cycle. So let's assume that the concept got accepted, and first of all we need to decide the requirements of that product or that prototype, and then we need to move on with building the prototype, then evaluate with a customer. Sometimes the customer means us internally. So then if we decide or the customer says that the prototype is good enough, depending on the case, then the prototype ideally becomes the final product. But then if not, then we should go back and improve the prototype and go through the cycle again. However, the yes option is never the case, so you can just forget about it. And we should always go back, improve things, change things, and then go through the evaluation process again. So in reality, this iteration process looks like this. So you can see that the designer sketches the idea, then we have to test the idea, then we have to implement something and test it again, and we need to change things and refine, and at some point of time the project or the product could be called finalized. So having that said, having that the reality is looking that chaotic as in this picture, we end up doing code like this. And this is already looking pretty beautiful, I would say. I have seen many worse things, or much worse things. So we should really try to improve that, don't you think? Anyway, after this chaotic process and all these changes and everything which is going on through the design iteration process and prototype development, we end up with something like this. So we have something that is working, but it's a mess. And also, we regret that many times we have a code which looks like an onion. Having that said, we are here today to learn how to build a good base and not an onion. So there are several things we can take into consideration. I have gathered 6 of them here, and I will be talking about those 6 today. So we will be focusing basically on this. Let's start from the first one, which is to support different backends. So reusability means that we can use the same UI on different backends. It can be either the same products, versions, different versions, or it can be even different products. So what does that mean? That means that our UI should be backend independent, so to say. And how we can do this, that's the very well-known pattern. That's the MVC. That's the Model View Controller, usually known as MVC. From Wikipedia, let's read the definition. Is a software design pattern commonly used for developing user interfaces, which divides the related program logic into 3 interconnected elements. This is done to separate internal representations of information from the ways that information is presented to and accepted from the user. Following the MVC architectural pattern decouples these major components, allowing for code reuse and parallel development. So this is exactly what we're talking about at this presentation. This is exactly what we need to do and settle since the beginning of our development. Let's see these MVC parts one by one. So let's start from the model and see how it looks like to apply this pattern on QML prototypes. So the model, it's a general definition from Wikipedia. It says that it's the central component of the pattern. It is the application's dynamic data structure. It's independent of the user interface. It directly manages the data, logic, and rules of the application. In QML words, that means that this is a non-visual QML file. Since it's a non-visual, it usually derives from QtObject. And it contains all logic of an application, as well as the connections to the backend services and application-specific properties and functions. This file is the only one that can make use of backend imports, and it is also supposed to make sure and add necessary checks so that in case there's no data in the data in the backend, or the backend is failing for some reason, so that we make sure that the UI, it's not breaking because of that failure. Instead, we show some placeholder values. A model can make use of other models. Just to have it more clear, I have taken the music application example from NEPTUNE UI. This is the music store. It's a music model at the end, but it's just that in NEPTUNE it's named stored. So you can basically name it as you wish. That's doesn't really matter. What matters is that you apply the pattern ideas and not really getting out of it. So we see the music store, for example, we are inside the onCount change function. This is where the playlist of songs has changed. Either we have more songs added or less songs. And we can see that what it does is, for example, it gets the artist, it checks whether the entry exists, and then whether the artist property is not empty. So then it returns the property, otherwise it returns unknown artists. And it does the same for the album. And the rest are specific functions regarding the header text in artist view, so some application specific stuff. So let's have a look then at the view. We have already seen the model. Now the view. The view, its general definition is that it's any representation of information, such as a chart, diagram, or table. Multiple views of the same information are possible, such as a bar chart for management or a tabular view for accountants. For example, in QML words, the view is a visual QML file, and it's the only one that can make use of models. That means that if it doesn't use a model, then it's a simple controller itself. It's not a view anymore. Following up with NEPTUNE UI and the music application, I have taken the music view.qml, so we can see clearly at the code that it's importing the stores, it's importing the panels as well. Panels are the controllers in NEPTUNE UI, and it's importing some controls. The controls are in general specific widgets of the application itself. So we see that it also it references the store at the top, the music store, and it's instantiating some panels probably, and so on and so forth. Right, let's move on to the controller. The controller, its definition says that it accepts input and converts it to commands for the model or the view. In QML words, that's a visual QML file that consists of widgets, and it's used by the views to usually handle the data. So therefore, a view can make use of many widgets and or controllers, but a controller cannot use a view or a model either. So again, from the same music application, if you have a look at the album art panel, so we see that it's just importing the controls. Again, the application's specific widgets, and it has just a bunch of properties and signals declared, and consists of item, image, and so on. Right, just to have a look at the application structure, this is how it looks like. That gives you a better picture of what does that means to structure your application in that way. So we see that inside music we have the controls folder, again, that contains the specific widgets for this application. That means that those are not used anywhere else. And we have the panels folder, which stands for controllers in that case. So we see the album art panel, the IC album art panel that stands for instrument cluster, album art panel, etc. And we see the application specific pop-ups. We see the stores, so the models, and we see the views as well. And of course, there is the main .qml file, which is the file that brings everything together, and it's the main file of our application, of our music application in this case. So at the end, visually, this is how this looks like. We can see at the top the album art. We can see that this is the entire view, and we can see in the middle that there is a list of songs displayed, which is coming then from the backend, which is handled by the model. Right, so just to get a deeper look at the code, have created this small video starting with the store. We can see clearly that there is a bunch of functions and properties specific to the music application. And in the middle, we see the view. We can see that it's it's using the store, and the panel where we see that it's a bunch of controls and widgets and list view and so on. So let's just have a break and short break, and then we continue with the rest of the points.
All right, just as she said, we'll take a 5-minute break. So we'll be back here at 16 past the hour. Have a good break. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. We're ready to start the second half of the video, so enjoy and stay tuned for the end for the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome back. Let's continue with a list of points. Next up is to eliminate dependencies. So if we create a bunch of dependencies in our application, then first of all, it's getting non-maintainable, but besides that, it's impossible to reuse anything of it in another project. So it's really important that we keep dependencies out of the way. And some examples, for example, is, as we talked before with the MVC, is to not have direct calls into the backend in our visual components, like for example this list view that it's set as the model, the phone directly from the phone service, the contacts model. So don't do that, just use a model or a store for these kind of things. And as well as, for example, on the right side, we see that the main view .qml instantiates both my view and my panel. We see inside the my view.qml code that it has a state there where it's targeting my panel to do something. So that's called dynamic scoping QML, and don't use it, as it can get really nasty. So because you're creating a dependency, which the most simple thing that somebody goes and changes the ID of my panel, then everything will break. Or somebody deletes the file. So again, once again, everything will break. And if you do this in more than one parts in the application, then you'll have to be looking for what these parts are and change or update the things. So it's time consuming, and it does not have to be like this. However, if no one changes the ID and no one changes the name of the file, or no one deletes the file, this will work perfectly, but don't or avoid using that. So from the Qt's official documentation, we see that dynamic scoping says it's very powerful, but it must be used cautiously to prevent the behavior of QML code from becoming difficult to predict in general. So in general, it should only be used in cases where the two components are already tightly coupled in another way. So in very specific ways. But in general, when building reusable components, it's preferable to use property interfaces instead, like this. So we can check, for example, we can see that the title text, it makes use of the title page title property. So instead of inside the title text have the reference to it by calling root.title, we see that there is a new property defined, property string title, and it's set to be the root title from outside, from when this component is instantiated, and where the property, the respective property, also is declared. So avoid doing that, because it's really not a good practice. Let's move on. Perform well. That's also a really important point that we should pay attention since the beginning. Of course, I have heard a couple of times, and also you might be wondering, like, performance, but why? It's a demo, it doesn't really matter. Well, yes, it matters. Because if you don't pay attention since the beginning, then sooner or later, the moment that you have to fix it, it will come. There is always the moment that the application doesn't run really well, or it takes much time to run. So then someone notices that, and then somebody will come back to you and say, hey, this is not going very well, please fix it. So it's better to do it since the beginning than having to do this afterwards. It will be too late, and it will probably consume more time than in the beginning. What we could do in order to optimize the code, for example, take care about the animations, the graphical effects, the fonts, the rectangles, and the assets loading. Meaning that animations, for example, if you can avoid those, then avoid those. Otherwise, if you can't avoid those, then keep those simple. For example, don't run JavaScript scripts inside animations and things like that. Graphical effects, same as the animations, try to avoid them. If you can't, then keep them simple. But for example, if you can use an image instead of creating visual effect with graphical effects, and use the image and so on. Fonts or text, try to avoid things like styled text. These things are also costing performance. Rectangles, don't use a rectangle if you don't need to paint anything on the screen. There is item, there is QtObject, so prefer using those instead. And assets loading, try to set the asynchronous property of images to true. Images that you don't need to load on startup, that property will make those load asynchronously. And keep only those images that you really need to see on startup just to load synchronously. So that will maybe gain you a few, I don't know, milliseconds or whatever. Then next, prefer using QtObjects when possible, and or items instead of rectangles. We just talk about that. Remove dependency leftovers. So ideally, a QML file could or should be able to run independently using QML scene. So it should be completely dependency free. That's the ideal case. Revisit and improve parts that were done quickly or change the load during design iterations. So these parts are really the most vulnerable. I know it by experience, and when you have to implement a feature, then you always go, implement it, we make it work. But of course, there is always room for improvement. So take this time and go back and improve things. Remove unnecessary imports. If you don't use a module, then it doesn't make sense for it to be there. Aim for simpler solutions. We just talked about that, not only for animations or graphical effects. Always aim for simpler solutions. And of course, use the QML profiler, which is included with Qt Creator. That will give you a very useful information on how to improve your application, which parts are the weak parts, and what you need to take care in order for your application to run better and get better in general. And remember always that quick prototyping costs performance if it's not done properly. So do it in the beginning, just to not have to do it later. Moving on, support different resolutions. That's of course an optional thing. That's if your project has to support different resolution, different screens. What you could do is to prefer using anchors. So in this case, for example, the tab bar, it's anchored to the top and to its parent left and right. So that means that if the parent its parent, it's resized, then this will resize as well. And don't use X and Y in these cases, because it's really hard to maintain those. And also, if you set fixed position to those, then those things won't move if you want to scale up or down your window. So it will look weird. However, you can use X and Y just in specific cases like this. For example, this is the indicator of radio button. it has its X and Y properties set to its parent width and height, so it's also relative to it, and it will follow up when needed. You can also consider making use of border images for images. Border image looks like the example on the right side. So that means that this image, basically it will scale, if we set it to another dimension than its own, it will scale at the top and bottom horizontally, at the right and left vertically. In the middle, it will scale both horizontally and vertically. But the corner, the 100 pixels we see at those corners, these parts won't scale at all. So these parts will remain intact, and that will create a nice scaled image for us, and we won't understand that it's not really its size or it's out of its size. However, it's not really a good practice to scaling images, so prefer exporting those for the respective resolution if you can. But yeah, just in case. Use SVG format for icons. That's also something really useful. They look better when smaller, etc. Implement the scaling factor. That's optional, and that will basically help you by multiplying every element in your UI by the scaling factor. Then this will resize as well as your window resizes, so they will follow up your window's dimension. So that's also very useful when needed, of course. Right, let's move on to the next point, which is the flexible widgets library. If we talk about recycling, of course, we would need to recycle our widgets. As we talked about in the beginning, if we have some buttons, for example, then we want to reuse that buttons on other parts. So talking about flexible widgets library, I would recommend to use the QtDay module that provides a variety of common widgets like button, radio, button, checkbox, dial, and bunch of others that are fully functioning, and those are just ready to be used in a UI just by importing the QtDay module. The good thing is that they perform well, as all logic is implemented in C++. That means that all controls are backed up by a C++ class. They support different styles and custom styling. So if our product wants to have two different styles, for example, then using the QtDay we can just implement the style variations for each control, and not so the logic will be the same, and we won't have to duplicate the code, at least the logic, twice for each style. So that's really very useful, and also having that said, they're really flexible and fully customizable. Just to see an example, for example, how it is to style a radio button in QtDay, you can see on the right side the code. This is a radio button. It's using the template of a radio button. And here you can see the style implementation by setting the indicator and the content item properties. So the result is this green radio button with green text we see on the left side. I'm explaining all these kind of things at my online course at Udemy, but however, if you have any questions, then just let me know. I have no issues to explain how this works in general. And now, last point, I'm sorry. Last point is the flexible assets handling. What does that mean? That means that it's better to keep your assets in a specific place and not inside every application. First of all, you would avoid things like this, like importing source like that. It's a bit ugly. It can become unmaintainable, and you could avoid, or you would avoid also the assets duplication. That means that if the same icon, for example, should be used in the calendar and as well as in the radio application, what you would do in that case? Would you like copy the same asset in both directories? No, this is not really optimal. So prefer keeping those, for example, in a single directory like this. Prefer doing that in the root directory of your project. Maybe create an imports directory and put the assets inside there, or put the assets directly there. And then inside that directory assets, you could then categorize your assets by application. So this is more organized and it's looking pretty straightforward, so everybody understands what's going on there. If you have that implemented, then you can consider having a style.qml. That's a file usually, or you can name it config.qml as well, whatever you like. This is usually a single QML file. It's defined as a singleton, and it contains all, or it can contain all functions and properties needed globally in the UI when it comes to the style, like for example the assets path. So we can see on the right side that there is a property string image path. We can see that it's the path, it's the real path to our images, relatively to where we are currently, of course. And we have implemented a function image with name as a parameter, and it basically returns the image path plus the name plus the termination, in this case PNG, it can be JPG, it can be SVG or whatever you want. And of course you can have a second function, for example, for icons, doing the same, so that you can distinguish between images and icons. Its usage then inside the code in the QML could be like the first one you see in usage section. So icon source, then it can be used like style.image and having the name of the image inside it. In this case, that means that it will use the close.png from the controls folder inside the assets folder in the structure we just saw. Of course, it can the style.qml can also contain other things, like for example the screen dimensions. If you're going to use the same dimension in other parts or in more than one parts in the UI, then why not define a property there and make use of it or reference it by the style. It also can contain information about fonts and font sizes, as we see, like font family and color, font primary color, for example, and sizes of text as well, and other specific project values like disable text opacity, grayed out, and whatsoever. Now, summing up, the first thing is to take seriously performance since the beginning. That's my opinion, of course. Second is to concern about producing quality code versus features. There will be many people pressuring you to implement this and that, but it's also really important that you also take your time to implement quality code versus something that is just working. So that said, stay dependency free and always improve and optimize your code. Don't use the backend directly in QML, always create a model for that. We have already explained how. Use cautiously the QML's dynamic scoping. I would say don't use it at all. You don't have to. There are other ways to do that, so please go for these other ways. Maintain a clean project structure. That's very important. So, for example, don't do things like this. First thing here, rather prefer doing it like the right image, because think about new people which are coming in to start on the project, and they see this bunch of QML files and they have no idea where they belong, what should they do, and why are there, so they have to be asking and finding out. So this is time consuming and reduces productivity. So just maintain a clean project structure since the beginning. Avoid the code duplication. You don't have to do this, just avoid doing that. Create a utils UMN module that's optional. You can keep their files of global usage like style, tracer, etc. And document project specifics, if any. I'm mentioning that because I have been in a couple of projects where there were some things specific to the project that needed to be done before running it, and they were nowhere documented. So I had to really look for the right person who knew what kind of thing that was and what I had to do, and he or she should explain me, and that was also time consuming. And also what people usually do is that they create the README file once the project is going to be upstreamed to the Git with the initial commit, and that's it. They never take care about updating it, never again. So just consider doing this just for other people to know what to do with that, and of course improve productivity again. That's the idea after all. Make code reviews when possible. I know this sounds like fun, but however, 4 eyes are always better than 2. And delete unnecessary asset files. So sometimes design is changing, assets are updated, you get new set of assets from designers. Don't leave the old assets inside there. It doesn't make sense and it's confusing at the end. So delete those unnecessary asset files. Last but not least, cooperate. Think about that most likely others will have to look and or work on the same code sooner or later. So consider making their lives easier, increasing their productivity again. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much for attending this talk today, and I'm happy to receive your questions.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We are ready to go live with Alexandra to answer any questions you all have. So feel free to type them in the Q&A chat now. I see one. In the meantime, let's bring Alexandra here. There you are again. Hello. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for your contribution to QtDay, even if it is virtually. We really appreciate all of our speakers to spend the time even to do the Q&A afterwards. So thank you for that.
Thank you again from my side as well. So yeah, we do have one question indeed. So maybe we can go straight to that.
Absolutely. Yes, Matteo Canu says, do you have any specific tips for the QML profiler?
Yeah, so not really specific, but I would say not more than the obvious things. That would be to just take care probably first your JavaScript section on the QML profiler. This is always saying a lot, like where you have your weak points, what does consume lots of resources, so that you can go there and change that or optimize that. Also, animations are something that you can also consider change that, and then it can be also continuously running functions if you have any in your C++ backend. Yeah, that's what I can think of right now. Also, very important topic to this is not directly connected to the QML profiler, but is a general good practice, is that maybe you can consider loading, lazy loading your UI. So if you don't need parts of it on startup, then just put it inside loaders. That will make your startup faster. So you will have faster, better results also in the QML profiler. And however, there is extensive documentation on the Qt's official documentation webpage, so you can also consult that.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see, I think, yes, we have another question from Matteo who says, would you suggest defining the .pragma library JS files in the common directory to share JS functions that for some reasons cannot be transferred to C++?
Absolutely, yeah. Why not?
Great, thank you. All right. Well, I'll give everyone just a minute more to write any questions they may have. And how about you, Alexandra? Was there anything about QtDay that you enjoyed?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's a first time experience. Just being in front of a screen talking to some people somewhere. So I would say that's what I enjoyed more. However, I still miss the presential event, which I hope that we can get next year. Hopefully the situation gets better. But I really appreciate that you're still doing this, and I appreciate the participants that are actually spending their time to attend my talk. That's really important. And also write questions.
Definitely.
And all your effort you're putting there on Develer side, that we can have this event basically even this way.
Absolutely. Yes. Let's hope next year is a little better. Hopefully in person. We're all hoping for that. All right. Well, I believe that was the last question for today. So yes, thank you to all of the participants for coming, and of course to our speaker, Alexandra. We really hope to see you in person for the next edition.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, everyone. I just want to remind you that if you enjoyed this talk, please rate it on the agenda page of the site. And this was actually the last talk of QtDay. So we'll have the closing of the conference soon at 6 p.m. And that will be presented by Matteo Benci. And so please stick around for that for a final message for the closing conference. Thank you all so much for your participation and hope to see you soon.